I haven't seen this opportunity for non-interventionism in my lifetime. They're all
No.
freaking crazy warmongers. So Donald Trump seems to be right that he's not that.
Look at
So Jimmy Dore recently went on the Dad Saves America podcast to talk about his opposition to American warfare waged around the globe and why he sees Donald Trump as kind of an antithesis to the status quo warmongering we've seen in general. Now, Jimmy Dore does have some qualms with Trump, especially when it comes to his support for Israel, but I think he makes a lot of good points about war in general in this clip, so I wanted to watch and react. Let's just go and do that.
look at Afghanistan. The two great empires of the modern era couldn't ultimately win against guys with
It's because they live
old
there.
guns and old Toyota trucks.
They live there. They're not leaving. They're going to wait you out. I mean, they're not. And it was always the case. And as Julian Assange taught us, that war was not meant to be won. That war was meant to be ongoing. Just like same thing with the Ukraine war. It's not meant to be won. It's meant to be ongoing. And that's what Joe Biden wanted. He wanted to fund that war to 2029. I mean, they want to keep it going because it's just money funneling. That's what the military industrial complex. Eisenhower wasn't kidding when he said, "Beware the undue influence of the military industrial complex," and that's who's been running our foreign policy. And it's all about an upward transfer of wealth from the Treasury to the international security state, the military industrial complex, and that's why when when Joe Biden was pulling us out of Afghanistan and leaving all the equipment behind. Why do you do that? You leave all the equipment behind because then you got to order new equipment. That's why. And then you get big contracts. And those are the people pulling the strings.
He is so right about this, as Julian Assange said, and this goes regardless of theater. They don't want a successful war, they want an endless war. So it's a constant spigot to transfer wealth from the Americans, a lot of the middle class Americans, to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Boeing and all those contractors that just feed off this.
And I said, well, people were giving him credit for always ending the Afghanistan war. Look what a good guy. And I said, well, he hasn't said what he's going to do with the money that we've been spending in Afghanistan. I want to hear what he said because my feeling is they have another war in the chamber. And they did, the Ukraine war. So as soon as they stopped Afghanistan, they started the Ukraine war, and there it was.
I'm trying to remember who said war is the health of the state.
Randolph Bourne is the answer.
But it is definitely the case. It seems like the question of war and peace is the biggest of the political questions. It's the thing that shapes, it's like history. It's all of history. It is the issue that ultimately frames all the other issues. And it's interesting that doesn't usually tend to be the case with like American politics. It's just because we're separated by oceans, so we're just protected and we don't think about it the same way. Like, why do you think that just rolls along and the public goes along and doesn't really
I think because they consolidated the media in 1996 with Bill Clinton, right? When they did the Telecommunications Act, which took us from 50 giant news media companies. They were already giant. Now with their even bigger 6 companies, some say 5. So they control the narrative. Look at COVID. It was all about narrative control. And look at Russiagate. I mean, people still believe in it, right? Even after the Mueller report. Swipe Chuck Todd just tweeted out, people should read this. And just the Mueller report. Yeah, the Mueller report where he said there's no evidence of collusion between Donald Trump's administration, organization, political machine, and Russia. There's no evidence. You mean that one? And so that's why I think people aren't more upset about or more in tune with the war machine and what it means, And somebody said smarter than me that, whatever we do overseas, we're eventually going to do to ourselves. And of course we do. We do that. Now we have militarized police. We're now censoring ourselves. The government's now funding media organizations to do propaganda on our own American citizens. I had it done to me. They sponsored, that's a big thing for USAID. They sponsor these fake media organizations, which are just propaganda arms of the economic hitmen in the United States. and one of them was called Vox Media Ukraine, and they would do videos and articles about, because I was telling the truth about Ukraine, and they were trying to discredit me, and they were saying that Jimmy Dore is a conspiracy theorist and a liar and a this and a that.
You're a Russian plant.
I'm a Russian plant.
You're doing Russian
propaganda.
talking points.
Yeah, so if Vladimir Putin said 2 + 2 = 4, and I said that's right, they'd say, "Oh, why are you repeating Russian propaganda?"
This is so true. Jimmy's just hitting the nail on the head here. And Michael Schellenberger's done some really good research about how the American government has used regime change tactics that it has used overseas in the Middle East and elsewhere, including Ukraine in 2014, and kind of turned those tactics inward on the domestic populace, especially after Russiagate, and especially after the Jan 6 insurrection narrative. So Jimmy's right on here. I think one of the big reasons that Americans don't kind of get drawn into being so anti-war anymore is indeed the media, as he says, but it's also because that's all a lot of us have known for our entire lifetimes. My entire lifetime, the U.S. has been at war here and there. Maybe there'll be a few year interregnum in between, but people look at Bill Clinton's presidency as a time of peace, and he had his misadventure in the Balkans and bombed Afghanistan and starved out Iraq with targeted bombings there and a no-fly zone and all the sanctions. It's just, and all the support for Israel. That was peacetime for the U.S. So that is our status quo.
I'm just saying something that's true. Putin also happens to be saying something that's true. I'm not saying it because he's saying it. I'm saying it because it's the truth. And yeah, so I forget what the question was.
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting at this moment now is, like, for me personally, is I'm probably most skeptical of, like, my opinions when it comes to foreign policy, whether it's Ukraine or otherwise, just because I can only know what I'm hearing, and I have only so much time. I feel like most of us feel that way, and so
what are you unclear about? I'll help you.
No, okay. With Ukraine, Jeffrey Sachs's fundamental story strikes me as being correct.
Yes.
That,
of course,
that we've got this march that starts with the expansion of NATO.
NATO, that's right.
That was fundamentally a violation of the agreements that were part of the end of the Soviet Union. So more or less everything about that seems right, or at least seems like plausible and more coherent than the advocates for this is great and we're going to win.
And we know that's the truth about the NATO narrative because we have the minutes from the conversations between James Baker, the U.S. Secretary of State, and Mikhail Gorbachev that says that NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. Now, you have some naysayers say that only meant Germany, but we know from a document uncovered later that the German diplomat Hans-Dietrich Genscher confirmed that it meant NATO moving eastward in Europe in general, and then it could not incorporate countries like Poland. He said that in the notes. That was part of their conversation.
The notion that, oh no, we're going to support Ukraine and they'll win. How is that possible?
It's not possible.
So then right away you're in like, well, what are we talking about here? And we're 3 years into it.
Again, that war's not...
Yeah, it's a meat grinder. So now Donald Trump is like waving the white flag. It's like, well, why didn't you win, though? You had 3 years to win.
Yeah.
So it's not even that it's just, there's still I guess it's true of everything. Maybe it's not just foreign policy. I just try to not let myself get too caught up in the story I think I know. Just in case. There's something else. There's some other angle.
The story I know is not the story being told in the establishment press, the corporate news media, which is what gives me confidence that it's the real one, right?
That's the right way to say it right there.
They don't bring Jeffrey Sachs on Meet the Press. They don't bring on Mersheimer, right? They don't bring on Aaron Mate or Glenn Greenwald, right?
But we bring all of those on Liberty Vault, remember that.
Right? And so
no.
So that's how you know that's the real, and it's obvious. I mean, it's just obvious. I mean, everybody from Henry Kissinger to So Noam Chomsky and everybody in between said, "Don't do this. Don't poke the bear with Ukraine." And the last thing you want to do is push them closer to China, which they did. The Biden neocons, which is what they are, did everything they shouldn't have done, and they.
And he's being charitable here because even some of the top brass of the 1990s US, the coldest of cold warriors like George Kennan, said don't do this. George Kennan even had an interview with the New York Times where he said, you know, upon the first wave of NATO expansion, he's like, what are you doing? You're throwing away my life's work. You're going to revive a new Cold War. This is absolutely preposterous. So Jimmy's right here. The mainstream media doesn't want us to know that anymore, but that did happen in the 90s.
They're balkanizing. Right now they're selling off half the farmland in Ukraine's already been sold off. BlackRock's coming in. They're going to rebuild it they're going to own it. They thought they could do the same thing to Russia. They thought Russia was going to be weaker than it actually was. Russia's now stronger than it was before the war. And
yeah, I was at this ARC conference last week, and Eric Prince of BlackRock, not the investment firm, the military contractor, he said this. He said.
Blackwater?
Or Blackwater, that's what it is, Blackwater. He said Russia's ability to respond has actually increased as a result of the conflict, that they've adapted to the modern warfare and to the use of drones and all. So the notion that the strategic objective was let's weaken Russia, whose economy is like the size of Spain. So that's the other part I don't understand about the narrative. It's like, oh, it's Xi and Putin. It's like, well, Xi's got... That's like 100x the size of from an economy and a like industrial capacity. Why is just because they have nuclear weapons? Like, how do you understand the way these get grouped? Like, oh, it's Iran and Putin and Xi, but Iran and Russia are like pipsqueaks in comparison. It doesn't. I don't get it.
Right. Yeah.
I don't get that combo exactly. Like the new axis of evil.
Yeah, well, that's what they said about the Iraq War. It was like, oh, what we learned was we can invade, we can do that, we can go into a middle, and Russia's not going to do anything about it. And so that was...
They didn't learn that from Syria, by the way.
That's why they went after Syria, and that was because that was also over a pipeline. It was also over Israel wanted to do the Greater Israel Project. It was also Turkey wanted a part of it, but it had to do with the pipeline coming from... Qatar or Saudi Arabia, and to bring energy, and they were like, no, we don't want that kind of competition, and they wanted it to go through Syria, and Russia's like, fuck you, I don't want that, we don't want that, and so that's what that really was all about, because that's why Syria was like a client state of Russia and Iran, and so,
and that is what really turned Putin to persona non grata in the face of the American political regime, because up until that point, there was heaps of praises for Putin from George W. Bush and others. George W. Bush famously said he looked into Putin's eyes and saw a trustworthy man. He praised him several times, but Russia denied a U.S. regime change in Syria at that time. They got it now, just last year. Now they're killing Christians there, of course. But that's what turned the American regime against Putin forever.
The thing is, the thing that confuses me is I don't understand why Europe is so compliant and why they just went along with NATO, why they just went along with the United States, and that they don't stand up for themselves at all. And it's like that's Ukraine war has been so bad. When they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, that wrecked Germany. They're spending 2-3 times for the price for energy, and now we're the one providing the liquefied natural gas to them. And it's like, it's just so corrupt. It's so obvious what's happening, and I just can't believe there aren't more politicians standing up. And anybody who does stand up and say we want peace in Ukraine, and I don't want that, we want to have friendly relations with Russia and get our energy from them again, they're called far right. They're called extremists.
One of the things that
and they're assassinated.
But endless war is never extreme. Drumming up war for the next theater is never extreme. Inflating the hell out of the dollar is never extreme. Setting up a censorship regime is never extreme. That's just what sensible moderates in Washington do.
It's so dark.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things about President Trump that I think he means, and he has said all along is he it's pretty rare in a sense. He talks about the human meat grinder of this thing.
Yeah.
Like that is the place where he starts.
Yeah.
He doesn't talk about the geopolitical positioning and the great powers game of Risk.
Right.
He's like, this is horrible. There are hundreds of thousands of human beings being butchered.
They're just cannon fodder
And
for a economic proxy war.
it's like another example of this political inversion that I guess I just wonder if do you think it lasts? Do you think that this is like a real like pivot in our politics beyond
I hope.
him?
I hope it is, I hope Donald, I hope Donald Trump turns out to be the non-interventionist that he claims to be. I hope he doesn't start a war with Iran at the behest of Israel. I hope
Amen.
he doesn't do an ethnic cleansing but I hope he does make friendly relations with China and Russia. I hope he does end the Ukraine war, which it looks like that is happening. That is going to happen. And
I'm a little bit more skeptical than Jimmy here. Not sure when this was recorded, but the restoration of U.S. aid in return for the ceasefire gives me some concerns, even though it's very good that deaths have stopped. I don't think Trump will generally warm relations with China, for sure. He wants to rattle the saber with China over tariffs and potentially Taiwan. But they're right about Trump's rhetoric during the campaign. He started with the human element. He said, I just want people to stop dying when he was asked about this. So I still have a glimmer of hope. That would be his biggest accomplishment ever if he could end U.S. involvement in Ukraine or secure a peace.
And so I'm like Glenn Greenwald. I share an optimism, and we'll have to wait and see. We'll know them by their fruit. But I haven't seen this opportunity for non-interventionism in my lifetime. They're all freaking crazy warmongers. So
certainly the neocons have been shut out of that wing of the Republican Party, even though some semblance of pro-war attitudes survive, especially when it comes to Israel. But it's hard to deny there has been a shift, and Trump's largely responsible for it. Trump is largely responsible for killing both the Barack Obama kind of lineage and the Bush lineage over this.
Donald Trump seems to be, right, that he's not that. And I think that's why he was so vehemently opposed by the deep state, right? Because he was, we know they lied about the troop levels in Syria to him. They lied to him when he said, hey, I want to pull the troops out. And they're like, oh, we got a lot. We don't have any, and they were lying. And
to this day, the U.S. still occupies the northeastern portion of Syria, about a third of the territory after the regime change operation, and while Christians are being massacred. So, yeah, it's known that Trump's top brass lied to him about troop levels. And just imagine that. People that are working for you, supposed to be working for the executive branch in the interest of the American people, lie to the president about that. That is true.
So and Miley also committed treason, so we'll see. We'll again, fingers crossed. There's good parts. He certainly ramped up the drone war when he was president the first time, and like
in Yemen and places like that.
And if he doesn't handle this Israel thing right, they're going to start a world war. That's my big fear, right?
Yeah, I think Jimmy was absolutely spot on about literally everything he said in this video, just about. Maybe he's a little bit more optimistic about the chances for war to end in Ukraine, but man, is he on point here. Yemen's the forgotten war. No one talks about that. That might be something that ends in literally 1 million deaths because it's just a starvation blockade on behalf of the Saudis that the U.S. is involved with no other constituents other than the military-industrial complex. You don't even see, political candidates cheering on the war in in Yemen. But same in Syria, we're still occupying it. Troops need to be withdrawn. Trump in his first presidency escalated that war, just like Yemen. Largely, I agree, though, he is much less of a pro-war interventionist than his predecessors. He's not perfect at all, especially when it comes to Israel. But I remain hopeful for peace in Ukraine. I don't think the ceasefire will necessarily get us there, but hopefully some things that come from it will. But I want to hear from you guys. What did you think about what Jimmy said about, Interventionism, war, regime change operation, and the American empire? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and what we say here at Liberty Vault is always no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.